Hello everyone, and welcome to my Sister Wives For You channel. I hope everyone is having a wonderful day. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Kody Brown under fire as Audrey supports Leon's bombshell reveal became the unexpected flashpoint of a sprawling and emotionally charged conversation within the Sister Wives community, triggering a wave of online discussions, re-examinations of family history, and renewed debates about the complicated nature of plural marriage as portrayed on reality TV. And although longtime viewers were familiar with the Brown family's history of shifting dynamics, alliances, and ruptures, the latest swell of attention felt different, fueled not just by the personalities the audience had watched for years, but by a deeper generational shift embodied by Leon and Audrey, whose presence in the broader narrative seemed to highlight the contrast between traditional structures and modern self-definition, creating a vivid tableau where personal identity, family loyalty, and public scrutiny collided in ways that seemed to echo far beyond the edges of the show itself. And as fans gathered on social media platforms, from Reddit threads dissecting every line of dialogue to TikTok edits that stitched together moments spanning a full decade of Sister Wives footage, the core of the controversy repeatedly circled back to the question of how a family built around a once-shared vision adapts when its younger members begin speaking openly, assertively, and unapologetically about their experiences, their truths, and their expectations for how they deserve to be treated. And while no single moment could be isolated as the spark that set everything ablaze, many observers pointed toward Leon's recent reveal, amplified and affirmed by Audrey's steady and vocal support, as the catalyst that brought long-standing tensions back to the surface, not because the reveal itself was inherently controversial in a cultural moment that has grown more accepting of personal identity, but because it represented a kind of emotional accounting within a family already stretched by years of fragmentation, shifting trust, and unresolved resentments. And in unpacking the reactions, the public seemed less focused on the reveal as an isolated event and more on what it symbolized about generational change, a willingness to claim autonomy from family narratives that had too often been shaped for cameras, for religious expectations, or for collective cohesion rather than personal truth. And at the center of the discourse sat Kody Brown, the once solid patriarch whose leadership had, over the years, been increasingly questioned as marriages dissolved, relationships with adult children frayed, and the earlier promise of unity gave way to a far more public and chaotic unraveling. And though viewers disagreed on exactly how much responsibility he bore for the current climate, the consensus across much of the commentary was that the family's younger generation had reached a turning point where speaking out, whether about personal identity, emotional needs, or past wounds, felt not only justified but necessary. And Audrey's support of Leon became emblematic of that shift, representing a kind of grounded, present-day authenticity that stood in stark contrast to the often careful messaging seen in earlier Sister Wives seasons, where conversations were frequently framed around the family's desire to normalize plural marriage rather than delve too deeply into the internal emotional complexities that inevitably accompanied it. And as this new wave of discourse built momentum, fans revisited earlier seasons with fresh eyes, suddenly seeing in old footage hints of tensions that had once been easy to miss, such as the subtle cues in group discussions where younger family members hesitated before speaking, or moments when the emotional labor seemed uneven, or scenes where Kody's attempts to unify the family through sheer assertiveness appeared to land poorly with children who were beginning to develop their own independent understanding of identity and relational boundaries. And this rewatch culture infused the current controversy with a sense of retrospective insight, generating long, deeply thoughtful commentaries across fan communities, where people began articulating how the entire arc of the show might look different when viewed through the lens of personal self-actualization rather than the lens of plural marriage logistics alone. And Leon's reveal, paired with Audrey's consistent advocacy, became the narrative touchstone for that reinterpretation, functioning almost like a narrative hinge that allowed audiences to revisit the past while making sense of the present. And although Kody's critics were vocal, sometimes harshly so, many viewers also acknowledged the immense pressure and complexity that came with raising a large family under a national spotlight, and some Fans argued that the current friction could be seen not only as conflict, but as an inevitable phase of evolution when a group of children raised in a highly unconventional structure reached adulthood in a world markedly different from the one their parents grew up in, a world in which self-expression, mental health awareness, and identity exploration were not only encouraged but expected, and this cultural backdrop, shaped by social media, by shifting generational norms, and by a growing public understanding of what it means to step away from inherited structures, helped explain why Audrey's steadfast support of Leon resonated so strongly with younger viewers who saw in the couple a model of partnership rooted in affirmation, mutual respect, and shared courage, qualities that felt refreshingly modern when juxtaposed against the more rigid, hierarchical tone that often characterized earlier seasons of the family story. And while the online discourse frequently centered on Kody's perceived failures, whether in communication, emotional accountability, or adaptation, there were also deeper thematic discussions emerging about how families navigate change when core identities evolve, especially identities that had previously been framed within specific religious or cultural narratives. And the tension between personal freedom and collective tradition became the subtext of nearly every conversation, prompting fans, bloggers, and commentators to examine their own experiences with family expectations, generational conflict, and the bravery required to speak a truth that may complicate or strain long-standing bonds. And from this broader lens, the story was no longer just about Kody being under fire, nor solely about Audrey offering support, but about a family standing at the intersection of change and legacy, trying to figure out how to move forward when the old rules no longer apply and the new ones are still being written. And as the discourse grew, more viewers began expressing hope that the situation, however messy, however emotionally charged, might ultimately prompt the family to engage in deeper conversations about acceptance, boundaries, and the need to allow adult children to define their own identities without fear of judgment or withdrawal of support. And in this sense, the controversy acted as both a mirror and a catalyst, reflecting back the unresolved tensions within the Brown family while also encouraging them, perhaps, to confront the emotional work that had long been deferred. And for many fans, the emotional heart of the moment lay not in the conflict itself, but in the image of Audrey standing firmly beside Leon, offering a model of love that was both soft and strong, quiet yet resolute, a model that signaled to younger viewers that support does not require spectacle, that affirmation does not require permission, and that sometimes the most powerful act within a complicated family system is simply to say, "I see you, I hear you, and I am with you." And as fans continued to analyze the situation, it became increasingly clear that while the story had begun with a specific incident, a reveal, a reaction, a wave of online commentary, it had grown into something far larger, a cultural conversation about the right to define oneself even within the most intricate and high-pressure family structures. And whether or not the Brown family ultimately addressed these dynamics publicly, the moment had already carved out a new space within the sister wives discourse, one that would continue to shape fan interpretations, rewatches, and future discussions for years to come. And as the conversation continued to expand, the emotional landscape surrounding the Brown family grew even more layered, with fans observing that the latest surge of attention seemed to expose long-standing fissures that had always existed beneath the surface, but had rarely been discussed with full honesty. And in this sense, Audrey's presence in the narrative functioned almost like a stabilizing force, a reminder that chosen family, empathy, and emotional safety could coexist even when biological or parental relationships were strained. And some viewers noted that what made Audrey's support particularly impactful was not any dramatic proclamation but rather the quiet, consistent way they affirmed Leon's autonomy, their voice becoming something of a symbolic anchor amid the swirling chaos of public scrutiny. And commentators online began examining how this dynamic, two young adults navigating identity, love, and family tension with openness, represented a generational model that contrasted sharply with the earlier decades of the Brown family story, where children were often expected to integrate into communal narratives rather than step outward with their individual truths at the forefront. And this contrast, far from being merely dramatic fodder, became part of a broader cultural reflection about how family storytelling changes when younger generations feel empowered to articulate experiences that older structures may not have been equipped to validate. And in this way, Leon's reveal became more than a moment. It became a lens altering the way viewers interpreted past interactions, and suddenly scenes that once seemed benign took on new meaning as fans revisited early episodes, noticing subtle emotional cues that hinted at private struggles or suppressed individuality. And while it would be overly simplistic to paint any family member, including Kody, as a singular villain or hero in such a deeply complex dynamic, the narrative nonetheless invited audiences to examine the consequences of authority, tradition, and emotional availability within large families, especially ones that operate under unique cultural systems like plural marriage, where roles and expectations can be both rigid and ambiguous at the same time. And as fans debated these themes, some pointed out that the Brown family's public visibility added yet another layer of complication, because living within the frame of a reality show meant that personal identity journeys were inevitably filtered through editing, narrative arcs, and viewer interpretation. And while the show's earlier years had largely focused on the logistical, social, and religious aspects of plural marriage, the current discourse, driven by Leon, supported by Audrey, and amplified by fans, seemed to be pulling the spotlight toward the emotional interiority of individual family members, raising questions about how each person had navigated growth, identity, and self-esteem under the weight of public consumption. And this shift led many viewers to express a newfound sympathy for the adult children, whose process of stepping into their own identities had unfolded not just within a large and complex family system but within the watchful, often judgmental environment of reality TV audiences. And the more fans discussed this, the more the narrative expanded from being simply a story about who supported whom to a broader reflection about what it means to develop a strong sense of self in circumstances that were shaped by belief systems, family politics, and media narratives that the children themselves had never chosen. And in this light, the controversy surrounding Kody being under fire felt less like a singular moment of blame and more like the natural result of years of emotional backlog rising to the surface, as adult children began speaking about their experiences with candor that had not been common in the family's earlier public life. And because Audrey's unwavering affirmation of Leon symbolized a path forward grounded in openness, many viewers took comfort in seeing a newer generation of the family modeling communication styles rooted in mutual respect, emotional literacy, and boundary setting, all of which resonated deeply with audiences who had long hoped the Brown children would evolve beyond the tensions they grew up in. And as conversations online continued, it became clear that the story had reached a phase where audiences were not merely consuming the family's narrative but actively dialoguing with it, bringing their own experiences, values, and generational perspectives into the interpretation of events. And this participatory relationship between viewers and the Brown family's ongoing saga underscored just how deeply the show had embedded itself into cultural discourse, becoming not merely entertainment, but a mirror for the complexities, contradictions, and emotional evolutions that nearly every family faces in some form. And so while the controversy may continue to morph as new developments arise or as the family members speak for themselves in future interviews, statements, or episodes, the lasting impact of this moment, of Leon's grounded self-expression, of Audrey's gentle steadfastness, of Kody being publicly scrutinized not out of malice, but out of a collective desire for accountability, will likely linger within the sister wives conversation for years, shaping how fans interpret not only the family's past but also the unfolding chapters ahead.